Ongoing Directive. Just how good is it now, really? Now this comes from two places. One, I want to clarify something. Two, I'm seeing a lot of crap. The first thing I want to clarify is, just in case you've been living under a rock, IKEA put out an amazing video of where he goes over quite literally every single talent in the game, with the changes, how much these changes are worth, the overall DPS increase, what are like the best in-slot talents for varying different things. I'll link that video in the description below. However, in that video, he shows Eyeless, Sadist, etc., as a 30% increase across the board. Now, this isn't wrong. This is, while the talent is active, it is a 30% increase. But what a lot of people have taken this to mean is it's always a 30% increase. During the test that he ran with the numbers that he showed, I believe he's running a Dod-Foamath on a striker build. You explained to me how in solo you are able to get a 100% uptime on Sadist with a striker build. You can't. That's the short answer. You can't. So this then leads into people running things like Ongoing Directive. But as I did in a previous video, showing that not all talents are what they seem. Things like Flatline, at the time it was a 15% amp, but by the time you put all of the attachments on in your build, ends up being about 13.4. Something like Eyeless, Sadist, etc., depending on where you use it, you'll either get a 30% amp, as we would do now with Ongoing Directive and Sadist, or with something along the lines of putting on Strikers, you're going to get a lot less because you're not going to have the uptime. But then, okay, you're going to get this 30% amp, but is it comparable to other builds? Does Ongoing Directive with Sadist actually compare to a high-end build with Killer, for example? Which is essentially what this video is going to be going over. Just how worthwhile is Ongoing Directive. Now, if you run Ongoing Directive as a support style role, like I do, there's no real right or wrong answer. Play the way you want to play, go nuts, just tell your teammates, whack Sadist on, because you're going to have all of the bleed bullets, and you can go for it. But if you're running Ongoing Directive as like your main DPS build because ex-YouTuber told you it was OP, well, let's have a look, shall we? Now, just so we can understand where Ongoing was and currently is, let's have a look at the changes. So they've increased the hollow point damage amplification from 20 and then 35 with the chest to 20 and then 50% amplified damage with the chest. This is actually a hell of a buff. However, if you recall, in previous editions and versions of the game, the standardized chest that we like to use for Ongoing Directive was either Obliterate or Glass Cannon. Now, Obliterate has also seen a change. It's gone from being 25% total weapon damage to 20% total weapon damage. So if we then just do a very simple equation just to show how much Obliterate would give, 1.2 times 1.2 is 1.44. So this is obviously below what the chest would now give, that 50% amp. But if we did use something like Obliterate, we would also get the brand set bonus for that piece, and then obviously the backpack, etc., which can help compensate. It's not going to be by much, but it can help compensate. Going Glass Cannon, which is 25%, is going to give us 1.5. So this is the exact same amount of damage that we would be getting from something like Ongoing Directive. Obviously, we're going to be taking more damage, but the trade-off for this is all of our damage, including the bleed tick, Pestilence, Plague of the Outcast, no matter what it is, all of our damage has a 25% multiplier. So in effect, although in terms of shot for shot, it will be the same as the Ongoing Directive chest, you will be getting more damage from Glass Cannon simply just because of how Glass Cannon works. And then finally, something along the lines of Perfect Glass Cannon gives us a whole 6% more. For a lot of people, that whole 6% more for taking an extra 60% incoming damage isn't going to be worth it, but the point still is these are the areas that we're going to be going over just to show that ongoing directive is, sadly, nowhere near as good as a lot of people are actually pointing out to be. Yes, it's received a buff, but depending on what builds you were using previously, effectively the only thing that has actively changed with an ongoing directive build is the buff to Sadist. That's it. Which then means if we actually directly compare with the changes, the old ongoing directive build, which is 4-piece ongoing directive, a Cheska Gruppo setup with Vigilance Glass Cannon. We have a Dod-Foamath here. We're not going to be looking at the talents for now, but yeah, as you can see, this is the build. It is at 60% crit chance with 137% critical hit damage. Versus the new setup, which again, 4-piece ongoing directive, a Cheska backpack just to help make up our crit chance, and then Coyote's Mask, again, Dod-Foamath just for bog standard. This build comes in at a staggering 129 critical hit damage before Coyotes, 59% crit chance, and once we activate Coyotes, we get 154 critical hit damage. This is what those builds look like in a calculator. They're very, very similar, but the main thing to actually notice is going to be the application of Coyotes on the ongoing section. The old OD setup doesn't have Coyotes. Effectively, ongoing directive has been buffed by 4%. 4%, which arguably isn't actually coming from ongoing in the first place. It's entirely coming from that lovely addition of Coyotes, which is like the only real change to the actual ongoing build itself, other than, like I said earlier, the biggest change is actually just Sadist, but we were running Sadist anyway. This is what it looks like if you remove the Coyote buff. Yeah, the old setup is winning by 2 to 3%. So, has ongoing actually been buffed to even be comparable to what it was previously doing in the first place? The short answer is no. Has it added build diversity to the ongoing set overall? Well, yeah, we get like one extra build. Congrats! Now, obviously, the main takeaway from this is we can run pretty much the same level of damage we were running with the previous setup, and we get the cannon side of things, not so much the glass, which, yes, is a massive, massive pro. This is a huge positive now running the ongoing directive chest, because it gives us the damage that we had with glass cannon, just without the being made of glass, which I am all for. My point, quite simply, is in reality, this set hasn't actually been buffed anywhere near enough for it to be considered competitive within the DPS spectrum. In fact, what we're now going to do is look at the new ongoing directive setups with the Cheska backpack and Coyote mask, and we're going to be comparing it to high end. Yeah, that old chestnut again. So here we go. Let's actually have a look at comparing OD to this high-end build. The standard high-end build, 3-piece Providence, utilising the sacrifice and the gift, Contractor's Foxes, Coyote's Mask. We are not going to be running talents just yet. Now, in a previous video, the one I showed earlier, the damage difference between the high end and something like ongoing directive was quite substantial. Even activating a talent on ongoing directive barely put it in line with high end. It was still like 2 or 3% below. So without talents, we have a mess, to be perfectly honest. Ongoing directive by itself is completely incapable of keeping up with high end. So the thing that's actually going to set it apart is going to be the 100% uptime of Sadist. So let's add Sadist in. Who would have thought a 30% amp would be actually that damn powerful? Everyone, hopefully. Now the problem here is we're still not running a talent on our high end build for our weapon. What's pretty popular at the moment? Killer? Let's go with Killer. Let's just add Killer in, shall we? Whoops. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a lot better place for ongoing directive to be than what it has been previously. Even with all talents active, etc., assuming perfect 100% uptime, ongoing directive was still like 7% below a high end. At least now it is able to compete directly with a high end, at the very least. So it's not like I'm saying ongoing directive is still bad. It certainly has seen an increase. It is certainly now a worthwhile thing or build for you to actually have in your loadouts. It really is. My point quite simply is there's a lot of people that seem to think ongoing directive is the greatest thing since some Neanderthal thousands of years ago invented the frigging wheel. It's not. It's barely just scraping by within the competitive space. However, most of this is simply coming from the fact that we're now able to put Coyote's Mask on the build. And the other part is quite simply, Sadist is huge. So there you have it, ongoing directive. Nowhere near as powerful as a lot of people are now currently claiming. It is barely as powerful as a high-end build. There are going to be a load of caveats thrown in because obviously there's conditions, etc. Some of you might want to opt for Wicked over Vigilance, which is still a decrease no matter how you want to look at it. And then obviously there is also going to be the team application of something along the lines of ongoing directive, which is where this build is now really going to shine in a team setup. If you're able to do high-end levels of damage, which ongoing directive now is, and then applying essentially another 20% amplifier to your team. I don't know if the chest carries across. I don't remember that. Maybe. So maybe 50%. I don't think it does. So maybe it would just be 20%. But to the rest of your team is now going to be worthwhile. Realistically, though, can we actually say that ongoing directive actually got a buff? I mean, it'd be more apt to say that it got changed. But as for it being a buff, well, for that, it would actually have to get buffed, and considering without Coyotes it's worse, and without the changes to Sadist, again, it's still worse than what we were actually running originally. So the changes that are being implemented for the ongoing directive build and what we're running now actually have nothing to do with ongoing directive itself. It's what we're running with it. So has it really been buffed? Food for thought. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.